Welcome to Unboxing, Play and Profit for the Gaming Curious. I'm Lane Nooney.
And I'm Joost van Dreunen.
And we're here digging deep on why games matter in today's economy. On the docket today, Friday, June 27th, first up, Embracer's latest annual report gives us something to chew on, mainly what it looks like when consolidation fever cools and restructuring gets serious. Then, two good reports out of the unionization world, new organizing efforts at Ubisoft Halifax, and a historic union contract ratified at Microsoft's ZeniMax studio. We've got power plays, people power, all that and more with your two very sweaty co-hosts. But first, we've got some catching up to do.
Morning.
Good morning from Zoran Mamdani's New York City.
You excited? What a party!
What a party! I mean, I bet it was good in Bushwick last night. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, all the financial district people miserable out there.
We sent the ghouls packing. Actually, even a lot of downtown Manhattan, most of it tilted for Mamdani. So, at least according to the Percival. Do we have to catch anyone up who's listening to us on this? New York City had its second run for mayoral primary ranked choice voting. And there was a whole slate of progressive candidates, the most progressive of those being Zoran Mamdani, who had the largest field campaign, maybe in American history. Over 1 million doors knocked, 35,000 people working as canvassers, volunteering as canvassers. And up against Cuomo, who basically, his strategy for getting out his message was to, hide in the house he doesn't own in New York City and take a shit. He didn't do anything.
So you're saying you don't like Cuomo?
Don't elect the sex pest was one of my talking points. I know we need more kind of mild centrism, protect the millionaire. No, fuck it. I want a free bus. Childcare. I don't even have children, and I want people to have childcare. That's what democratic socialism is all about. And I could always do with more videos of Zoran and Brad Lander, holding hands and riding bicycles together. I think it's a win, not just for, scary socialist politics or however people want to characterize it, but actual hope, brotherhood, good-heartedness, sincerity,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's as a socialist, I like it when people share things. I like the idea of a free. I take the bus all the time, but it's actually my preferred mode of public transport. To the point where my friends will make fun of me and send me pictures of buses anywhere they are in the world, and they ask me, "What line is this? Where does it go? Does it stop?" And it's just like this running gag. But the idea of a free bus and free childcare as a dad, huge fan.
Yeah.
And so, but it's the thing that stands out, right? Is that it was like you said, a knock on doors kind of campaign, and it's remarkable that you get all the flyers in the mail and you get emails and text messages. But what seems to really work is sending people to your house and knock on doors and say, "Hey, have you considered? Let's talk about this." And I find that kind of refreshing and also unique. The fact that perhaps the more hegemonic forces seem to sit back and relax and just let's do another billboard campaign. It's that's over now. People
how many Michael Bloomberg blew $8.5 million trying to there was a super PAC called Fix the City. It mostly specialized in sending out photos of Mamdani in Muslim prayer garb. Mm-hmm. And also there was a whole slate of texts that people got in the past couple of days that were just pictures saying that Mamdani was fat now. And that you needed to vote for Cuomo. I saw this. Maybe it's fake news. I don't know. I saw it on social media I saw it on my Instagram. It was this is what 8.5 mil buys you. This is the marketing tactic.
Some real thought went into that. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
It's wonderful. I know it's a refreshing sound after all the other noise I've been hearing. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But let's see if he's effective. I don't know, but let's hear someone
I
else
mean,
talk for a bit. That's my
yeah,
stance.
it's like the Democratic establishment could opt to use a lesson. And I think among a lot of the people I know, we want for this political party to take its left wing seriously, to at least engage, right? I think we will see the Democratic establishment try to shut him down every way it can. And I think it will further reveal the kind of inherent corruption that sits at the center of the American bi-party model. So
Yeah, more the same. It's sort of like we've tried nothing and nothing is working. It's like, yeah, okay,
what
good.
could young people and lonely men want? Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Hundred
maybe the
percent.
cure for male loneliness is canvassing for Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen. I'll
Um,
send a text. So I think it's a new thing in New York, but the analog campaigning that's a big one. Like it's sort of like this old school. Like you got to be out there, you got to show your face, you got to
yeah,
be with the people, which seems to have been a sort of forgotten skill. I was watching. It's currently happening live in The Hague, not too far from where I grew up. The big 2-day NATO top meeting, and it's several dozen older men in suits, and it's just a lot of pomp and circumstance. And it's just like, okay, there's very few military folk in the room. It's just like these sort of executive style politicians. It feels very ceremonial, and I
yeah,
understand that's the nature because it's so high level. And you're also like, oh Lord, like it's just it's kind of like political theater in some ways. And so I don't know. I'm perhaps getting a little practical as I get older, but like less ceremony, like less talky, more dewy.
yeah. Anyway, Mr. Cardamom is on his way to becoming mayor. So,
Hmm.
have you seen his rap videos?
I have not.
Oh, I gotta send them to you. They're very good. In other news, Yost, you're in the closet right now. You are literally on the floor in your own closet,
Yes.
talking into a microphone that has been suspended from a closet drawer. Is what? Yeah, there's a whole MacGyver situation. Why are you in the closet today, Yost?
No, since the election outcome, I figured it would be the safer way, the
Right.
safest place I could
We're
be.
gonna, inshallah, we are putting the white men back where they belong.
No, it has because of all the clothes here. It has the best insulation for sound,
Sound
and they're
dampening.
doing a bunch of construction next door. And my lovely wife is also working in the other room. I do not wish to disturb her incredibly important work, so I end up in the closet. I'm a marginalized lane, being pushed out. It's no, it's okay. It seems to be working fine. We don't all have a fancy setup like you. Like you seem
Why are
always
you
abroad in
not
dinner.
at your office?
Oh, it's 2,000 degrees in New York. Are you nuts? It's like, what am I supposed to? I don't think it's responsible to ask a team of people to go out and come to the office when it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit and like well below freezing. Nor do I think that's the case when it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius like it was yesterday. It's just too hot. And New York is not the place where you want the smell of garbage and the sweaty subway. I don't want to have a bunch of employees walking around in that and then say, oh, yeah, he made us come to the office. I don't think so.
Oh,
So,
you gave everyone a high heat index advisory work from home day.
yeah, look, listen, it's irresponsible. I don't want to be out there either, but it's like I'm not going to ask other people to do the same. And we are set up in such a way that it's reasonable to do. I don't know. What's the policy at NYU? Is there a policy right now, or is this just a free for all?
I mean, there isn't really anything unilateral. It kind of depends on the team, the department, the unit, the program. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I come into my office because it's very close to where I live, and I prefer working here to working at home. But I would say there's a lot of hybrid activity, at least within the kind of administrative functions. A lot of moving meetings to Zoom, right? It just
Mhm.
makes it easier for everybody because people are all spread out. I mean, the only thing that is really mandatory is like being in your class, right? So if your
Mhm.
class is in person, it's supposed to meet on person. Unless the one thing that sucks is like now it's like we can't even get snow days, or if like there's some
Yeah.
reason that they're like, yeah, just zoom through the crisis, zoom through the apocalypse. It's fine.
Yeah, the
Keep holding your,
disappearance of snow days has been
yeah,
like that
yeah.
is
No snow days, no, like any sort of massive weather event. They're gonna be like, you can teach anyway. It's fine.
No, no. I did have for the longest time. I still do have this policy during the winter months, at least. Is like when employees are unsure what's happening, check the NYU website. If NYU is closed, we're closed, because it's the second largest real estate owner, and it has thousands of people that it's responsible for all these reasons. And so if they shut down, everything's shut down. We're not like they call the shot more than anything else, and they have students that they look after, so they have a low threshold, which I think is appropriate because the public transport system does break down with a single inch
Yeah,
of water of
yeah.
rain, and
Or
it
when
is
there was the strike in the transit worker strike in Jersey, we got emails about they're like pivot to. I mean, it's all about pivoting to online, right? It
mm,
like allows for this movement away from the center of the workplace, but also perpetuates this idea that now we are like we don't even get the kind of bacchanalian moment of a snow day or like I can't get to the office, I don't have to work.
no winter coffee. Like you got to actually show
That's
up.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's
Oh,
hilarious.
my lord, we're do you want to get it? Do you want to get into it?
Let's talk about Embracer.
So, Embracer. So this week, thanks to some careful PDF reading over at Game Developer, there were headlines about how Embracer Group has reduced its headcount by almost 2,000 employees. This was a piece by Chris Kerr over at GameDeveloper.com. So we wanted to kind of use this bit as a springboard for talking generally about patterns of corporate consolidation and its many forms, right? Mainstream media. We'll focus on things like Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, but there's many flavors of what industry consolidation can look like in games, and Embracer is more of an insider baseball kind of version of that. To slow walk a little history, make sure we're all up to speed. So, like 5 years ago, anyone outside of Swedish finance had probably not heard of the Embracer Group. It now controls dozens of studios, loads of IP. It's carved out this kind of quiet monopoly of a back catalog on games, owns THQ Nordic, Gearbox, Saber, Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, Dark Horse Comics, the rights to Lord of the Rings for some goddamn reason, right? Its strategy has been buy everything. Small publishers, dormant IP, tabletop companies, mid-tier studios. Embracer was min-maxing a corporate acquisition speed run of B-tier catalogs, remasters, double A pipeline. And then that kind of hit a wall in 2023. We talked about this back when we were on. There was this kind of rumored $2 billion deal with the Saudi Arabia Savvy Games Group. That collapses. And Embracer since has been going through a pretty massive restructuring, shutting down studios, canceling games, laying off loads of workers. I'll let you talk about some of the kind of restructuring details. But it's getting split into three companies. One of them, Tabletop, has already been spun off. Asmodee, which I did not realize made Ticket to Ride in Catan when I when I looked at that.
Welcome,
I was
welcome.
like, holy shit! Like Embracer owns this. So yeah, and so Embracer dropped its annual report last week, capping off a fiscal year that ended in May. And when Chris Kerr at Game Developer compared employee numbers, he noticed that they had shed about 1,900 employees, some layoffs, some from spinning off or closing shit down. Meanwhile, I did enjoy looking through the Embracer annual report. The cover, I don't know if you caught this, Yost, depicts Henry from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, who, at least to his credit, is canonically bisexual now. So
Hmm.
you can role play him as gay in the latest Kingdom Come game. That was big content in my neck of the woods.
Not
Yost,
surprised.
maybe you have some other insights to share on what's going on with Embracer.
That's a good intro, lad. You should become a financial analyst right away. It's a no, that
I
was good.
charge $1 million, and then you can
That's
tax me.
that yes, and then we're gonna raise your taxes
That's fine.
soon. It's only 2%, whatever. I mean, it was the Embrace the story is interesting because it's a continuation. You mentioned THQ Nordic. That's where it really came from, right? It bought the rights to THQ, then became THQ Nordic. And THQ was this publisher that focused mostly on IP based development. So it would borrow other people's IP, make a game, and hope it worked. It did not. It went bankrupt, got sold for parts, and then sort of booted back to life by a group of basically Swedish bankers. And they really had this vision, I think, to become one of the largest European publishers that we didn't really have over in Europe in the way that you have that in the US, right? The game development in Western markets has been dominated by the North Americans, obviously. At the time, Activision, EA, Take Two, etc. In Europe, you would have Ubisoft, which at the time I think was worth like $9 billion total in market cap, making it this crown jewel of sorts. But the French, they like to fail at things, and it's the gradual decline that you see in Ubisoft is also like with it, the entire European market is very fickle. So Embracer emerged from this THQ Nordic effort and then went public and had a whole bunch of momentum, which then got accelerated and catalyzed even further with the pandemic, right? So all of a sudden, cheap capital flows into this, and it's sort of I mean, I always felt it was a very basic playbook of let's buy everything that's not bolted to the ground. And so very
Yeah.
proudly, they would say at every quarterly earnings report, we've just bought another 10, 12, 15 studios. And the thing is like, I mean, you don't have to be some MBA with 20 years of work experience to understand that that's just generally a bad idea. At least that's how I felt. Because historically, I mean, the data shows you as much. There's ample examples like EA, and back in the early, like late 1990s, Hasbro did the same thing where we just acquire things. Atari acquired things, which in all three cases leads to a loss of quality. And then the whole thing starts to go to shit because there's no clear management. There's very little transparency in the organization and the administration. And then anything happens, whether that's like just a failed title or just some exogenous circumstance or like a market decline or some financial crisis, and the whole thing goes tits up, right? It just falls apart, which is in
Tits up,
effect
he says.
that's what happened.
Sorry.
That's I can say that I'm from Europe. It's and it ends up being a moment where there is ambition and then it sort of blends with arrogance. Like that's sort of the problem. Like do you really have to buy all these studios? And they would have a very distinct sort of laissez-faire management style. It's like, no, we're just gonna just let everybody be free. We're not
We're
encroaching on the
gentle
creative.
Swedes. We're
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
don't look at what we're doing. There's nothing
very
going on
hands
behind the
off.
curtain. Yeah.
Well, I think that they genuinely meant to give everybody a sense of security around their creative freedom. But it's like, have you ever had all of your favorite friends in the same room? Like, it's just like the most diverse, divergent set of conversations that you just can't streamline any of that. And some of them are going to disagree. And so I think that's what happens. Like, just creatively, you feel that the momentum was starting to slack, and there's this absence of hit releases, and it just becomes this incredibly expensive thing. And so what Embracer ultimately needed was continued access to capital. So we talked about this
Mm.
during the pandemic before. They lowered interest rates, so that means large companies have access to lots of money and they can do whatever they want, and many of them did, including Embracer. And then the money train stopped, and suddenly it became very dependent on some of its big shareholders and investors. And I forget now if it was a rumor or if it actually came out, but the Saudi Public Investment Fund, now called Steer, at the time called Savvy, was about to deploy another $2 billion into
Yeah.
Embracer and then didn't. And so suddenly, like, you're trying to buy a house and suddenly the bank shuts you out, right? I mean, it's a terrible thing to have happen, but I think that started the crumbling that we see now. And so it's a real interesting case of like how a large ambition starts to fall apart because of all these things. And then, of course, the narrative becomes very easily like, oh, it's just arrogance. Bankers, they don't know anything. They know the price of everything, but the value of nothing, blah, blah, blah. And and it becomes this favorite story because everybody sides with the creators because they get laid off in droves, as you described. So
Well,
it's sort of you could have predicted this because many people did, including
yeah.
myself, and not do this. You could have seen this coming and made a different choice, and they just didn't. And I always wonder why they kept pushing that.
Well. Let me ask you, just from I mean, the annual report was very shiny.
Mm.
Is it going badly for Embracer, or is the execution from a kind of raw financialization perspective, right? That we've taken all these assets, We've dumped what we don't think we can monetize. And now we're going to have basically this kind of thing where you have three different publicly traded companies
Mm-hmm.
overseen by a holding company. Is that a desperate move? Or if we only think of the world in terms of spreadsheets, does it make sense?
It does. It's
He says with great weariness.
like the thing is, it's like if y'all can't get along together, then you should just be separate, right? And so I think the ambition was too grand, and it's too many different things. So the
You don't think it was imagined that this would eventually become the state of affairs that they would need to progress to, or do you think they were looking for the out through like the through Savvy?
I think that they wanted to bankroll it through Savvy and then become this, enormous European game publisher on the stock market. In the same way that you have an Activision. Activision, you recall, was valued at 70 billion during its acquisition.
Yeah.
So I think that they were eyeing that kind of number.
Hmm.
And there's a strong argument to be made that Europe lacks the same kind of presence internationally like you now see in Asia, historically from Japan and more recently in China. The same with the Americans, of course. So, Europe does need like a storefront. They do need to have some kind of seat at this like giant video game table, and they just don't. And so I think that's where they fit in many ways. If you buy Asmodee, and they paid, I believe, 1.2 billion or 2.1, I forget that, 2018. It's a tabletop company. They have the license to the Pokemon card games and stuff like that. So it's
Yeah.
a massive card-based physical game maker. And then they acquired a whole bunch of smaller studios, and by small I mean like 100, 200 million each. And so you start adding it all together. At some point, it's kind of dilutes, or it becomes hard to have a cohesive creative vision around all this. And then subsequently, it's easier to just split it up, right? And so that's exactly what they
Hmm.
did. So Asmodee is now independent again, and it's the one component that was making the most money. So they loaded the most debt on that one so that they could pay it off.
It was the tabletop was making the most money, eh?
hmm That's
Okay.
actually a bigger.
That's a lot of tickets to ride.
It's a lot of tickets to write, but I think it's also part of a larger counter movement where you have basically a growing interest among consumers worldwide in offline analog forms of gameplay. So tabletop particularly has been up and to the right. If you look at things like Games Workshop, if you look at more traditional toy makers, they are all doing really well in that
I mean, I
category.
know it's been having a moment. I guess I've always wondered with the high production cost of those sorts of products, how profitable ultimately that
But
is within the
it
game
isn't.
sector.
See, what makes it difficult to get in is like relying on other people's IP. So, like, getting the Pokemon license is one thing. If you look at a company like Games Workshop, is like very IP driven. They have their Warhammer franchise, and they just have very strict rules around it. What seems to be the new innovation is to take existing tabletop and figure out new stuff, right? And so there is a huge amount of tabletop games coming out through like a Kickstarter funded process. The difficulty is, of course, breaking the network effects that you have when people all buy a stack of cards and go play together, like a
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering. So it's hard to crack those dynamics, but it's possible if you push into different directions. So one of my favorites currently is a Trench Crusade, which is a former designer from Warhammer, and it's this very, very grim, dark future of infinite warfare and scary things. But what they do different from say Games Workshop is that they give you the 3D models, like that you can print out your own characters, as
Oh.
opposed to
Hmm.
charging you like $20 for a single
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
miniature. So what they're taking is the economics and innovating on that part. I think that has resulted in a sort of a renaissance or resurgence in tabletop gaming altogether. You see the
Hmm.
same thing in chess. Chess is more popular than ever. A lot of people are playing. You sort of spurred maybe by the Netflix show, but then just in general, chess got much bigger. Collectible card games are very popular now. So Asmodee, in other words, is a company that has a future in front of it. And ever since it's been spun off, it's been doing much, much better. Its share price is, it's at its, I guess, most recent IPO, it was around $100. Then it dropped to like 90, but now it's up to like 124. So it's
Hmm.
doing well overall, and I think that has everything to do with this momentum in this particular category. So that's one of the three pieces. The other ones are Coffee Stain, which maybe you'll know through Goat Simulator.
Yeah, yeah. That's their sort of indie and mobile. And it's isn't it like Coffee Stain and Friends?
That's what
You
it's
know?
called. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I love when a corporation has and friends in the
Hmm.
title.
I
That's
know. Uh, we are a family. We're a family company
we're a
of
family.
42,000 people. No,
Yeah.
so Coffee State and Friends, it's a indie AAA premium type thing. They do the sort of wonky, cool, creative stuff. Make $1 billion in sales, so that's pretty good. And it's a so I think they put all those promising projects in there that are not RPG based, let's say, because that's the third part, which is Middle Earth Enterprises and Friends, and that does. They have friends too. There's
Out of
friends
here,
everywhere.
Bilbo. Like
Well, so they hold the rights to Lord of the Rings and Tomb
it's
Raider.
the IP vault, right? It's Lord of the
Yep.
Rings, it's Tomb Raider. It's like this is where we're storing all of our big ticket IP assets, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's a pretty straightforward, easy to sell, easy to communicate kind of strategy, right? It's like we take the tabletop, we take the indie stuff, the cool, wacky stuff, and then we take the IP base. Those are three entities with a very distinct strategy that is easy to sell to the stock market and investors. And I
Yep.
think that also makes sense. And they can lean on their own strengths. Like now you don't have to. The problem when you have 200 different studios or 200 studios working on different projects, like how do you measure process? How do you hold them accountable? Like is what works for a 6 year development cycle for a AAA RPG the same as for like a wonky mobile indie game? Like, how do
Let me
you reconcile this?
so let me ask you a kind of business 101 question. Why, I mean, there's lots of big companies in the world, right, that have
Mm-hmm.
that divide internally, right? Versus this move of like spinning off into to create independent publicly traded companies. What is in your like most succinct direct assessment like why that move and not internal compartmentalization within Embracer?
That's a good
Is it
question. So
just about leveraging leveraging more capital out of it?
yeah, or the inverse, like offloading debt, right?
Mm,
And so
tell me more.
if you could show strong economics for your tabletop spin-off like Asmodee, you can then take all of your debt and say that's their debt now. Bye bye debt, off you go. And so then the other two are freed up. So that means that they don't have to spend as much money paying off their interest on all the capital that they've borrowed, and they can focus on investing and growing. So it's a progressive tax system, which I know you like. So like you like the biggest moneymaker pays the most in this case, and it's to remove pressure from the smaller ones, because this is what I mentioned earlier. It's like how do you make that equitable, right? Do all studios contribute to the overall organization's debt equally? That tends to happen in my experience in large corporations. Sales targets are X, and so irrespective of your own division's health
Oh
and
yeah,
momentum,
it's
you all
like
have to make it 3%.
it's like when NYU sends a email about how we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
tighten our belts, and it's like 2.5 cuts across the board. Doesn't matter how much money you're bringing in, how successful you are, how broke your department is. Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a unilateral kind of,
And so
yeah. They don't play
the
favorites internally.
Yeah, or maybe they do. Yeah,
Well,
I've
of
also
course they
heard
do.
stories where, like, I've heard stories about divisions that were outperforming everybody else by 10x, and they were basically informally told, like, you need to like chill out. You're making too much money. You're making everybody else feel bad,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
like,
yeah,
but if
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
else that is not performing
It's
as well is like 100 times your
it's
size,
it
then that's
literally
the norm.
becomes about kind of the challenge of negotiating company growth inside an institution versus kind of being able to operate freely and outside of the, I don't know, the sedimentation that happens inside of businesses.
Well put. It's the large companies; they are incredibly difficult to manage well and efficiently, and so I think it's the mature decision to do, the adult decision that Embracer needed to make of like, look, this experiment was not successful. Let's just reset, because they could have sold it off bit by bit to some other companies, which is what you see now. You see a lot of consolidation, but they just spun it off, and so now you have three relatively independent entities that are have a fighting chance to be successful.
Yeah.
However, and this is, I know, one of your things, it's like these kinds of massive transitions and transactions are always at the expense of labor. There's
Yeah.
always people that in a transaction just have to lose their job, and it's just that's the unfortunate thing. It's like you could have not done all this, and a lot of people would have not been discouraged or forced to work in a different industry. And so that's kind of the downside. This
Yeah.
is incredible destruction of capital in the end, even though
Yeah,
financially it's
sort
fine.
of operational risk gets pushed down to subsidiaries, labor issues gets pushed down to these subsidiaries while returns go right up to the top because it is Embracer that holds majority shares in each of these companies, right?
There you go.
So it's a way of excising labor risk as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's unfortunate that it's this way, but that's just kind of how it goes. And so, as and you mentioned ownership, so Lars, the now former CEO, he still owns 16% of Asmodee. Savvy or
Jesus.
Steer owns 7%. In other words, the same ratio is applied to Embracer, of course.
Yeah.
But so they split it up, but like ownership remains. I think it provides some oxygen for each of them. But does it fundamentally change leadership? I mean, it's a debatable thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to make some sense of this, right? So Embracer they're gonna bring in a new CEO, Phil Rogers, who's a vet exec from Eidos and Square Enix, and then Lars Wingefors. I can't say. I'm surely butchering that last name. It seems likely to become executive chair of the board, focusing on, and I quote, strategic initiatives, M&A, and capital allocation. I would have thought those are things a CEO does, but maybe I'm dumb. Can you talk to me a little about this kind of shuffling the deck of which chair the executives sit in?
Yeah, it's a good question. That tends to be deeply political in my experience. Is like, you have to get a bunch of people on the boards to grant you the authority to run a division or the whole thing. It's a increasingly select club of participants. So you see, for instance, like CFOs, they'll jump from one company to the next regularly. You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
what
they almost never fail down in my experience. Even when they fail, they get to move laterally or go up. Yeah.
Yeah, that tends to be. I mean, it's a you could argue, of course, which a lot of times people do, is like that's unfair. And who are these people that sit on top and they're so bad at what they do, or they're miserable people for some other reason? Or it's a very distinct skill set. Like the idea of being the CEO of a company of tens of thousands of people globally, that is a very narrow skill set, right? It's and so that's an acquired trait, or that's a like a that's where an MBA perhaps starts that process. Like it takes decades before you're anywhere near being good at that. And CEOs, successful CEOs, they can be pretty bland, and they can be the person that pissed off the fewest other participants or coworkers and kind of made their way to the top. So failing upward is one way to go. If you are very outspoken, have a very distinct personality that can kind of ruffle everybody's feathers. So by the time you get to the C-suite at that level, you've gone through so many hoops, like you've made so many enemies and friends along the way. It's like who's going to want to do any of that, right? Like, and so it's a very self-selecting group, but it's a very narrow group, and so that's why you see so many people sort of changing chairs, but they don't really,
Yeah.
they stay in the circuit.
Right. Ultimately, this all sort of becomes a kind of invisible hand, right? So Embracer is gonna will control through exertion of power through shares, but
Mm-hmm.
it also removes them from having to be the publicly accountable face of what is going on at these subsidiary companies in the way that a unified publisher would be accountable.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it breaks up the party a little bit, and so it divests them of a lot of debt in financial terms, but also responsibility in terms of fiduciary responsibilities. So in that sense, it's probably a relief. I think Lars has probably had enough for a while. Like he's been going. I mean, just think about the number of meetings someone like that must have had. And you're out there asking Saudis for billions of dollars. Like this is a high stress situation. So not to say that we should be so merciful. It's just like I could see that that's a very draining thing to do. And he's like, this is not working. We're doing too much here.
Yeah, spend your time in the hinterlands of Sweden instead.
I hear it's nice. I hear it's nice. So that's the bracer. The larger context here for me is always it's veer immediately into tabletop because I'm very partial to that and I have a lot of theories around that. But also, Europe is sort of trying to figure out its crown jewel. Like, what is the defining European publisher for the next decade? France, with Ubisoft, I mentioned, is sort of losing its momentum, right? Like Tencent's buying in. They spun off several of its most valuable IPs into this entity that Tencent now owns for 25%. It's basically just some complicated way for Ubisoft to raise some money because they're not doing so well. Then the Embracer story we covered. And then after that, everything else is kind of mostly owned. And then everything that's making a billion or more is privately held, like Playrix. You have Dream Games. You have Peak Games was independent for a while, but been acquired by Zynga over in Turkey. And so you have a few of these billion-dollar companies, but none of them really have the global presence that like an Activision did or an EA does,
Yeah.
or an Embracer. The only one that I can really think of is something like CD Projekt.
I was
Uh,
just gonna say,
you
Poland
know,
still got some spice, but
right. And I would relate that immediately back to the fact that Poland only was added to the global economy like in the 80s and 90s, developed this ravenous and highly skilled, but very cheap labor force around software development. And from that sprung
yeah.
their own sort of cultural localization of game content. They developed The Witcher, and I'm working on this big case study around it. But it's in many ways like because they had this absence of resources, they did really well there, and so you don't see that anywhere else in Europe. So
Mm,
like,
mm, mm,
who's
mm.
going to be the king or queen of the European games monarchy, right? And I say this from a coming back from a No Kings protest march. What we need is more kings. It leaves leadership still in the lurch in Europe. It should be more, it could be more, but it's a little unclear in the wake of Embrace's divestiture who's going to be leading it next.
Okay.
So it's an exciting time. It's a good time to start a game company. You should think about that. Maybe
Yeah, sounds like a great time to start a game company.
another big ticket this week that came out was Microsoft announcing the imminent release of a lot more employees into the wild. They're doing layoffs as a result of some financial pressures, apparently. Internal management was clear on major layoffs coming their way, which is concerning. Microsoft has been really in an interesting space, I think, with regards to its own hardware strategy, announcing a strategic partnership with AMD. They just released the handheld a couple of months ago. They announced this week a collaboration with Meta for one of the Quest 3 Xbox limited edition headset. And so you see on the hardware side, you see sort of a deprioritization of being entirely proprietary. On the software side, things seem to be going fine, but I think they're making cuts there at an alarming rate. And so, while that is overall kind of sad, it's not inconsistent with the rest of the industry. Sony announced the closure of a studio. I think they shut down Ben Studios, which made Days Gone, which is one of their first party IPs, which is a big deal. They had some failed live services projects. EA had a decline for the first time since before the pandemic and started immediately laying people off. So layoffs are going to continue in the year 2025, but the silver lining perhaps is the realization, the rationalization, how we treat the workforce, right? In the game of how the workforce is treated. And so unionization seems like the obvious answer here. It's a wildly unpopular topic with executives. And I can tell you about that. We can talk about that in a second. But Lane, can you tell us what's so unique about this new moment now? So we have Microsoft striking a deal. They are ready to acknowledge and recognize a
I,
union.
it's beyond that. So the deal has been ratified, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
might,
Explain to me what that as
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
non-union member.
we might also articulate that not as a thing that Microsoft does, but a thing that a company and the union that represents an employees do together, right? And so, what I'm
Mhm.
talking about here is Microsoft and ZeniMax, which is about a 300 person strong worker pool at ZeniMax, which is a Microsoft owned studio predominantly working on Elder Scrolls Online, ratified their first union contract. I believe the story was broken by Stephen Titilio over on his Substack Gamefile, and then lots of other places picked it up. But key point here is this is the first union contract ever negotiated and signed by Microsoft in the United States. And if you've been paying attention to the game industry for the past few years, you've certainly seen all of these stories come out about this place has formed a union and that place has formed a union. And the difference between a kind of union recognition, which is the workers gathering together, the signing of the cards, the vote amongst
Mm-hmm.
the workers of, are we going to have a union? Okay, that comes out to a yes. The corporation acknowledges that union, and in recent years, Microsoft has been pretty good about that, and we can talk about why. That's the handshake, right? Then you have to get to the contract, and that is what's called the ratification process, right? And so the contract is the material, it's the material outcome, right? So it took 2 years between ZeniMax getting recognized as doing the vote, getting recognized by Microsoft, and the actual contract happening, right? They had to threaten to strike in order to get Microsoft to move on this. It took them 2 years, but they got it, right? And so this is the first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know there are other kind of unions that have been formed under the Microsoft, within Microsoft's holdings. That those obvious, I think it's going to be really interesting to see those come down to the pipe. But this is a historic first for Microsoft as one of the biggest tech companies in America to ratify its first union contract in the United States specifically. Obviously, there are unions in other countries
Mm-hmm.
that it has recognized, particularly because labor law tends to be is more strident in many other places. But yeah, this is good news for everybody who has been waiting to see the outcome of this.
It's really interesting. But I have some skeptical questions around this, obviously. So I first want to know, like, you. So this is 300 people signed this at ZeniMax, but I understand that there were only quality assurance people, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's
So
primarily what ZeniMax does is QA. Yeah.
okay. So is that an important enough subset of employees to really carry this forward? Like, is this the Tinder that's going to set the whole thing ablaze, or is it just sort of like a handout kind of union
I mean,
ratification?
so one of the things we've seen is that QA is a particularly porous place for beginning union organization, right? That
Hmm.
it has frequently been because that is work that is laborious. I think it's where software related labor most feels like labor, right? in
Hmm.
in some ways QA tends to, they can get really punched down on internally. They can be definitely, like, there's a lot, companies really rely on quality assurance workers to work out the bugs that are an inherent part of the game development process. A lot of places have treated those workers very poorly, crunched the, and they're a place where a lot of compression happens
Hmm.
when a game is racing to deadline, right? And so they are a place where an exceptional number of just kind of basic labor abuses tend to occur. And they have, and they're these people in these positions, whether it's kind of an independent company or it's a QA department within a larger corporation,
Hmm.
there's a good history of this. But it's not just QA workers. So in Microsoft, right, there has been a spate of, so there's union recognized in QA within Activision. The
Hmm.
World of Warcraft devs have unionized, and the Overwatch devs have unionized, right? None of those entities have ratified contracts, but we're beginning to see this, and all of that happened in the past few years. I think all of it happened while we were not running this podcast, basically. And so that's it was a whole spate of stuff happening 2024, 20, and so I think it shows the kind of the creeping power and influence of these kinds of movements.
Yeah, it's really a notable moment. I mean, because it's never existed, right? So it's a material shift. It's a symbolic milestone of sorts.
I mean, not
Uh,
even symbolic, right? I would argue that the recognition was symbolic. The contract is material.
yeah, yeah. No, the recognition is symbolic. The recognition, of course, is material, and historically. quality assurance would be your way into the industry as a newbie. Like there is still not a very strong on ramp into in games industry employment. Like that's the one question I get from my students every semester. Like, how do I actually get into this? Do you know someone who knows someone? And it's but there's no clear on ramp, and so QA used to be the way to do it. Like you could basically trade your time to just be around studio people, and then hopefully
Yeah.
eventually find your way in the ecosystem. And that is a terrible job. The data indicates always that that's the lowest paid people, the harshest circumstance. You describe it exactly. Crunch time is a pain.
I mean, I think
So
that's also increasingly not true anymore within the game industry. That's what the game developers tell me, that QA is kind of not an entry point position in the way that it once was. But go on.
right, no, so that's shifted, is what I'm getting at. It's like it used to be that way, but I can see that the complexity of game design requires QA to be more than just like cannon fodder to drive trucks into walls all day long. And then there is, of course, the inevitable presence of AI somewhere in there, where you say, well, here, but let the robots do it. But it still needs to be managed and supervised. So I think the complexity of that process is probably more demanding, and therefore able also to ask for more security and financial certainty. The Do you see, so you see this development then spread out to other divisions? Do you see it? Is this the beginning of, are we going to see the rest of the year, the next couple of years become where the industry really takes unions more seriously? Or is this going to just satisfy people for now and then that's kind of the end of it? Like, how
I
do you
mean,
see this develop?
my prediction would be that, and this is specifically in the context of Microsoft. I think your mileage may vary with other sorts of corporations, but what enabled this kind of outcome
Mm-hmm.
is because historically Microsoft, for the first 15 years it exists, from the mid 70s to the early 90s, there's no kind of labor movement
Mm-hmm.
integration or history in there. There's attempts in the 90s for with a company called Tax Savers that Microsoft had bought, but they were doing a lot of kind of internal. They tried to unionize, Microsoft shut them down. There was a lot of kind of union busting, right, that happens. There's also kind of the Liongate controversy that happens in the early, kind of the mid 20 teens. And then there's what really changed the way that Microsoft approached labor organizing was when it wanted to acquire Activision Blizzard.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such an interesting long arc here, right? Because there was so much scrutiny around that. I mean, we talked about it fucking endlessly on this podcast, right? How many hours did we burn? It was a different regulatory environment. Lena Khan was riding high at the FTC, right?
Uh-huh.
And Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were kind of issuing missives concerned about the monopolistic power that this would give to Microsoft. And one of the ways that while the acquisition was still pending, that Microsoft, one of its moves was to sign a neutrality agreement with the Communication Workers of America, which is the primary union in the
Mm-hmm.
United States that represents tech workers in the game industry, right? The CWA is who Microsoft was like fighting with in the early 90s when Tax Savers tried to unionize, right? With the kind of local CWA subsidiary there. And so that neutrality agreement did a number of things. It was a promise for Microsoft to sort of stay neutral in unionization efforts at
Mm-hmm.
Activision Blizzard after the closing deal, to provide a clear process for employees to freely and fairly decide on union representation, and allow for voluntary recognition if a majority of workers signed their union cards, which basically meant that Microsoft was not going to fail or refuse to recognize a kind of democratically voted upon union, right? Because there were already a bunch of unions inside of Activision Blizzard, right? And so if Microsoft was going to take on this company, they would have to bring this recognition. Eventually, that neutrality agreement expanded beyond just Activision Blizzard. It came to encompass ZeniMax. And so now, kind of the long, long, long arc, the bearing of that fruit, right,
Mm-hmm.
is, and Microsoft absolutely dragged their heels, but ZeniMax and them got it done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's these other unions now inside of Microsoft, Overwatch, Blizzard, QA within Activision, and you have to just kind of imagine that at a certain point it becomes apparent, I would hope,
Mm-hmm.
to let's just ratify these fucking things and get it done.
Mm-hmm.
That this is just like business is going to keep will move forward more effectively if we just manage this situation rather. And I think this is where you see, I would say, less negative press around this stuff with regards to Microsoft versus someone like Google, right, who has been so
Mm-hmm.
actively union busting.
Amazon.
Amazon, yes, another great kind where, yeah, they that you can see the kind of difference, right? And so that neutrality agreement, which was just it was a thing Microsoft did to get the deal done, and I guess it seemed like a reasonable compromise on their part, is actually bearing this kind of interesting and different labor attitude
Mm-hmm.
within one of the biggest tech companies in America. Do I think that every executive at Microsoft is a friend to labor? Like, no, I don't. But I am heartwarmed to see that this stuff can doesn't have to face a constant fucking utterly gruelingly failingly uphill battle in every single fucking instance, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm with you on all this. I think it's a sort of a sea change of sorts. It's a critical moment. It also occurs against the background where we see the new Switch 2 coming out and games cost 80, $90. So that's cool that all these people now have like unions that they can join. Are my video games going to be $100 or more? And where is like, what does that do? What's the impact on me as a consumer? Like, how do you explain that?
Your impact on Yoast as a consumer. I mean, if games go up to $100,
Is that a fair
you
price?
you got to keep in mind the majority of that money is still not going to your workers, like under any calculus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that, like, I would say go profile your executive and your middle management level payments
Mm-hmm.
before we talk about QA workers getting salary increases, right? That this I think that is a, and I think you know this as well, that is a talking point that
Mm-hmm.
the executive strata uses to move consumer sentiment against labor justice. And so if your games are really really expensive, that one, games are expensive to make, like, I hate to break it to you, but also like that is still is because all this industry is just kind of captured by corporate interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is who is actually kind of taking the majority of your bucks there.
Interesting. So that I guess the next logical question is, but then what does Jason Schreier have left to write about? Like,
Well, there's so many other
now
companies
it's all going to be so amazing now.
that can't figure it out, you know.
I,
I
I'm
mean, he
joking. I
just,
like his work very much.
yeah,
It's,
he dropped that
but
piece at Bloomberg about Dragon Age and how
mm-hmm.
the executives there just really like mucked that whole release up. You know, trust me, like, bad management is endless, Yost. You know, Jason Schreier's he's got nothing to worry about.
No, he's
You
gonna.
know,
It's an evergreen topic, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it comes at an interesting time. Right? The industry is having like a tougher moment. It's like a decline for the last couple of years. You start to see pressure on the consumer base with like price point going up. It's true that development only gets more expensive. When you hear about all these layoffs, you kind of hope that it's a lot of the sort of surplus in middle management and always shielding the creatives. AI plays a factor in here too somehow. Like when it comes to people being replaced by robots.
Yeah, can I actually insert here? So there were
Yeah.
specific AI related protections in this contract, right? So it covered wage increases, minimum salaries, crediting policy, and specifically with regards to AI.
Mm-hmm.
And here I believe I'm quoting Titilio. It commits ZeniMax to uses of AI that augment human ingenuity and capacities
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that these tools enhance worker productivity, growth, and satisfaction without causing workers harm. ZeniMax has agreed to provide notice to the union in cases where AI implementation may impact the work of union members and to
Mm-hmm.
bargain those impacts upon request. So they basically inserted this language that says this is all code for if this means that people start losing jobs or QA starts getting taken over
Mm-hmm.
by AI rather than AI being a tool, which is when you go to these panels at GDC and everyone's in a circle jerk talking about AI, that's what they do. They call it a tool. And then they go home and they fire a bunch of fucking people, right? And so they're saying, like, keep your word on this. It is a tool. There's ways that it can make these processes more economical, less laborious, and
Mm-hmm.
we will see you back at the negotiating table if that turns out to be otherwise.
I think that's a fair shake on all this. The people making this stuff, they need to a certain degree be protected because it's such an unpredictable market, and the labor force itself should not also be tasked with taking the capital risk because they don't often get the benefit of the capital
Exactly.
benefits.
Especially
So,
not in
so
QA. Yeah.
in QA or any of these things. It's very, I mean, of course, historically, you have the industry relying on these bonus contracts around their meta score. So you get above 80, you get another couple million, you get 85, you get a little bit more. So so there is an incentive structure, but that tends to only apply to senior management or
Yeah.
whatever, the top 50%, top 20% of the group working on something. And so that says like, but the trade off, and this is how a lot of executives have described it to me too, is to say, okay, it used to be a pool of people that sit on the work floor, and then I today do this thing, but tomorrow I'm doing this other thing. In a union-based setting, I'm no longer allowed to take on two, three tasks. I can no longer delegate any of these three things to one person. I have to assign audio to the audio person and visuals to or whatever like rudimentary understanding I have of this. And so it slows down and creates some inefficiency as well. And so that's their counter argument. Like, okay, this lowers margins. But I would argue that the games
Well,
industry.
lowering margins is different from slowing down. And if you employed the necessary people to make a game, it wouldn't slow you down.
It's That's true. What I was getting at is the fact is like so much of it is very hit driven. So like, the games that rely on getting a sort of marginal return or very slow burn in terms of revenue, they don't tend to have that big overhead. It's really the studios with thousands of people. So now you're talking about a Rockstar, right? Or you're talking about like an EA studio, like a DICE. These places, when they succeed, make billions. And so like yeah, slow down. I mean, look, if it works, you make so much money. Like it makes, and if it doesn't work, then nobody has a job, right? I mean, it just fails and everybody gets laid off. So there's a lot to say for how it slows down the creative
Yeah.
process, the production process, or how it pushes margins.
I mean, I guess I have a certain kind of suspicion there when executives want to tell me how labor works on the floor. If you're running a situation where you don't have clear kind of pipeline pathways where one day a guy's doing graphics and the next day he's doing audio, I have really different questions about what's going on at your studio,
Well, it's
that
just like a hippie fest. Everybody's just working together, man. It's cool. Some
yeah, and
days you
I
cook
would
and
I would
I look after the
imagine,
kids.
I mean, these are the kinds of things that contribute to churn, right? This kind of, I mean, I would consider that a kind of, we have so, games are such an amazingly dense industry. There is so much specialization in craft.
Hmm.
I would sort of counter insist that these are jobs that require that kind of specialized knowledge, right? You don't in film have someone running craft services one day and holding a boom the next. So there are like this idea that we need everybody in there able to pitch in, right? That I think sometimes that argument is a cover for the fact that you don't have a lot of longevity amongst
Hmm.
workers in the game industry, right? This is an industry where a lot of people are gone in 10, 15, 20 years. They don't know how to manage, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that is a larger problem to your so-called concerns about efficiency and slowdown than anything having to do with, who's making your wave files,
Spicy. For all, that's the strategy I deploy for all of my studios. No, I I think personally like that there is a growing up that's happening here, right? It's the fact that every other industry in the entertainment already does this or already has this to some extent, and the fact that gaming is so behind is, I think, a function of the fact that the games industry has been sort of an underdog in many ways, and in order for it to really truly grow into like this cultural significance that it has, it needs to also fix the back of its house, right? It's just like a natural outcome. When there's this many people involved and their livelihood depends on it, it's one thing, but you also got to kind of do it the right way, right? You can't be a mature business that like leads the cultural conversation and then at the same time exploit workers and have like ridiculous overtime and crunch periods. It seems a little counterintuitive. Like, yes, there are amazing things you get to work on. At the same time, it's like, okay, so, you know, any kind of top performing athlete counts calories. So rationalizing your business and your business model is part and parcel of being globally successful, I think. So I think it's a healthy but painful process for a lot of companies. Very cool. So you're
Very
excited.
cool.
There's a lot of wins for you this week then. Huh?
Yeah. I'm excited. I'll talk about it for 1 second. I'll just hit the primary points because I think we got to wrap this up. But also, the unionization effort at Ubisoft Halifax. I got so carried away talking about ZeniMax, but
You forgot about the
uh,
French.
yeah. So the majority of the 60-person Ubisoft Halifax studio, so they're working on stuff like Rainbow Six Mobile,
Hmm.
signed union cards. This was filed with the Nova Scotia Labor Board. The secret ballot should be held soon. They're organizing with Communication Workers of America of Canada. So,
Hmm.
not in opposition to Ubisoft, but to preserve, as what they call it, the sort of equity, excellence, and innovation. And just this sense that like people do better work when they feel secure in their workplace. And so they see this as this is being framed as a kind of proactive step in in an unstable industry. It's inspired by kind of the success of efforts like Bethesda Montreal. And we're just wishing everybody over at Ubisoft Halifax a very happy union vote to you. Just picture the Bugs Bunny meme, you know?
You're so excited.
Do you have a poem? Let's end on a good stuff. You were assigned the poem this week?
Oh, I'm the pone master.
Yeah, I told you my
Uh,
owns before.
you gave away all your secrets.
What sucks about games this week? God
I
knows
don't.
there's something.
I'm supposed to say something bad. I
You
have a habit.
I'm setting you up. Yeah.
There's all this union talk. I think it's terrible.
If I Google bad things in games, no, that just
No, it
brings up
doesn't.
a lot of Reddit.
It doesn't. It doesn't work. I've been straining these last 2 days to find something that really upsets me, and that or upsets me is just sort of like the crappy thing of the week. I'm actually quite excited. I'm optimistic this week, so I'm going to submit an own of my own, and we have two owns. How about
Two
that?
owns.
Yes. And my own in that case will be actually the Games for Change conference that's happening tomorrow. No, that happened yesterday when this goes
Well,
live.
yeah, as of, I guess we should have said earlier when we were talking this, we record on Wednesdays, but we drop on Fridays. So when this episode is live, yesterday would have been the first day of Games for Change, happening Thursday, Friday at Parsons in New York City. I will be there on Thursday. Sorry,
You will have been there.
that's right. Past
So
me will have been there.
so my own this week then was the Games for Change conference, and it's because I think that if we talk about unions for the same reason, we should talk about the larger impact and sort of like the positive messaging that games can have. There is always the question to the extent of like how corporatized is this? Is this some kind of fig leaf? Is this like a faux thing? But to their credit, Games for Change has been pulling this card for the last several decades, as far as I remember. I remember going like early 2000s, and it was like three people on a slice of pizza. It was very rudimentary, and now it's this full blown like they got good lighting, and they got a fancy flyer announcing people who have like headshots. It's all very professionalized, and I think that that's very encouraging. I mean, the benefit of it is I like that it's in New York. I like that it's participated, it's taken serious. While these things always tend to dilute perhaps a little bit, like it might be a little bit of theater to some degrees, like they keep pushing that agenda. I think that that continues to be important. So I like that party. That's my own. I'm happy that we're not forgetting that either.
All right. My owns are two game trailers I saw that got me excited. First is Big Walk. So this was announced at Summer Games Fest. This is the upcoming release. It'll come out in 2026 from House
Hmm.
House. They were the studio that did Untitled Goose Game.
Okay.
And Big Walk is like a multiplayer walking simulator with some very cool tricks. So it's a sort of open world, experiential, exploratory game. You play with it's four folks play together, and
Mm-hmm.
they've built this custom kind of voice audio system so that if you like wander far away from each other, like basically the way that you sound to each other will be a reflection of your physical distance in the space. And so if I get yeah, so my yes, exactly, if my three friends you know are on their way up to the top of a mountain and I fall down it, right, they're going to hear me go kerplunk. The world is filled with puzzles and little like challenges that are very like self-directed. They make a lot of use of this issue with voice, and so I think there's a lot of them where like you can't communicate or you can only communicate in certain ways, and so you have
Hmm.
to figure out how to kind of solve these puzzles collaboratively in these environments that are really going to play with whether or not you can see each other, how you hear one another. And that to me is so much more innovative and impressive and exciting than like the next Persona 5 game, or like, I'm sure I'll have a blast in Grand Theft Auto 6, but this to me is where games like push edges, right? Let's take a bunch of tech we already have and do something we've never done with it before, rather
Hmm.
than just pack more pixels in. So I'm super excited. I have a group of friends out on the West Coast. We do a lot of co op play together, and we're all really excited to hang out inside this like goofy, quirky, darling little space and
Right on.
yeah, yell at each other in a forest. The second trailer I got really excited about is there is going to be a Power Wash Simulator 2. I can't.
Ooh.
This game, I played the hell out of Power Wash Simulator 1. I beat the game and
How do you beat a power?
I power
Okay, I'll
washed
just.
everything. Things I love about this game. The trailer is just footage of power washing. Like they're like, who cares? Like that. There's no voiceover. There's no like explanatory text. It's just like, oh, he's power washing again. You can tell that there's kind of like it seems like maybe you go to a town and you're helping revitalize it through the power of power washing. You can pet the cat
The
at
healing
home.
power of power washing.
Yeah, you can pet the
That's
cat, which is seems like a new innovation. But I was just so excited to see them power wash new stuff. I was like, I can't wait! I can't wait to get in there. This will be the game that forces me to buy an Xbox Series X. I've still been riding an Xbox One because I was like,
strong endorsement.
there's no. I was like, what do I really give a shit about buying? Maybe I would play Cyberpunk if I had one, but
But is that a
um,
platform exclusive?
it's
Is it?
it. They're just. I don't think it'll be available on the Xbox One.
What about Steam?
Yeah, but so because the way this is a game I'm gonna want to play on my sofa,
Hmm.
and I know I can hook my Steam Deck to my television. Like it's annoying and it's a pain in the ass, and it's all just much more streamlined for me if it goes through either my Xbox and my Switch. The Switch does not appear to be a platform it's immediately launching from, so it
Hmm.
means I'll play this on my Xbox. I mean, maybe it'll be cloud play. I don't know. On the little list of lineup of logos at the end of the trailer said Xbox X, so
You
I'm
should.
that's
You should
fine.
get.
It's
That's
like
really
it's
cool.
like I'm like 4 years out of. They got to be under $300 by now. So
I have no idea, but I mean,
subscribe to this podcast so that Lane can buy a new Xbox.
well, here's my recommendation. So because I ordered one of those Meta slash Xbox limited edition headsets
Whoa.
for work. It's always research material, but it's those are $400 and they come with Game Pass, and so you could probably play it on that thing, which might even
Oh,
be yeah.
VR is really hard because I deal with hypermobility, and so I have a bunch of like muscular skeletal stuff, and putting a big weight on the front of my head. Got a quest. I was really into Beat Saber, and the fact is I can do that thing for like 15 minutes before it starts to become an
Huh.
issue. I know they're lightweight and all that, but if you have a body that's really sensitive to load, It's just really not a viable way of enjoying play. I wish you could play it laying down, but it doesn't really work that way. It really
Hmm.
assumes an upright posture in the way that it triangulates space. So it's sort of a bust for me.
That's interesting. I mean, when you said hypermobility, I'd heard that as a buff more than
No,
anything else.
it's not. It's not the like fun twisty
like,
kind.
like I'm
It's
pretty
the
mobile, but
it's
you.
no. It's not like I'm not like double jointed. It's more that all the real quick explainer on this that is for some reason happening at the end of this podcast is that my the kind of cartilage or the
Mm,
kind of connective tissue that is supposed to hold my bones together
mm,
doesn't. It's really weak, and that means my muscles have to do all of this extra work to hold my body in correct positioning, which means it wears my muscles out. So I'm
mm,
susceptible to chronic pain, all sorts of like crazy muscle strains. It means that I can't like work, people can sit and like work at a laptop for hours and hours and hours. That is, I can't live that life. That's why I come into my office, because I have this whole crazy standing desk, voice to text, audio transcription setup that is
mm.
for like managing a disability. So yeah, the VR, it's not conducive. The putting that load on top of my head ain't the vibe.
It's unrealistic. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, yeah.
I had no idea. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so the last question I have about Power Wash 2, does Doja Cat know?
I don't
Because
know.
that's how I fell into it. It's like it was all over the social medias. And Doja Cat was playing, and it's like it's always so fun when you can see a celebrity or a famous person just sitting in their own space, having a good time. In her case, smoking a bunch of weed, playing Power Wash Simulator, and it
Maybe
just
we
like
can
brings
get
people down to a level. I like that.
maybe we can get Zoran playing Power Wash
Ooh.
Simulator.
I wonder what he would play. We should get him on the show.
Oh, yeah. What
What would
does
he
he
play?
what does he play on? He probably plays like Connections on the New York Times Games app, I bet.
Yeah, he's seems pretty wordy. He's very eloquent, so he probably reads. He's a reader.
Oh,
Ugh.
yes, does he have like an Apple game subscription that just
No, he signed up for the Atlantic Games, I'm sure.
Oh god. All right. Now that the Atlantic has come into this, I want you to give us a review of your new head toy soon.
Yes.
And otherwise, next week we're going to be talking about the ESA State of the Industry. No, the ESA Essential Facts
Mhm.
document. And we're planning on having an interview with Phil Salvador at the Video Game History Foundation about some fun stuff that they've just dropped in their new digital library. So join us
Very
next
cool.
week for that. Anything else, Yost?
I'm done. All
All
set.
right. And good night and good game.